By looking at pictures from West Germany in 1973, you can see a remarkable difference. On average, Germans looked much thinner than their modern descendants. This wasn't caused by extreme diets or joining a gym. The way Germans ate, moved, and went about their daily lives was heavily influenced by a very different way of life. Reasons include real hunger, the rhythms of traditional Hausfrau cooking, and a society that hadn't fully embraced convenience yet. The shadow of hunger. The Second World War left Germany devastated, and the suffering didn't end with the peace. The Hunger Winter of 1946 to 47 killed hundreds of thousands of Germans, as rations fell to as little as 700 calories per day in some industrial cities like Essen. West Germany finally ended food rationing in 1950, while East Germans lived under restrictions until 1958. An entire generation understood genuine starvation as a lived experience, not an abstract concept. By the 1970s, those who had survived the post-war hunger years were raising their own families. They carried with them an almost sacred attitude toward food. Waste was unthinkable. Portions were measured with practical wisdom rather than abundance. The idea of eating simply because food was available contradicted everything they had learned about scarcity and gratitude. Children absorbed these values at kitchen tables across the Federal Republic. The rhythm of German meals. Traditional German dining followed a distinctive pattern that naturally regulated consumption. Mittagessen, the midday meal, was the main event of the day. Mothers prepared a warm, substantial lunch that children came home from school to eat. Fathers often ate in factory canteens, the Betriebskantin, where portions were standardized and balanced. Abendbrot, literally evening bread, was precisely what the name suggested. The evening meal consisted of bread, cold cuts, cheese, perhaps some pickles, or sliced vegetables. No one expected a second hot meal. This lighter supper meant families consumed fewer total calories without any conscious restriction. The structure itself prevented overeating. Kaffee und Kuchen, the afternoon coffee and cake tradition, provided a sweet interlude around 4 o'clock. But this was typically a Sunday ritual, a special occasion shared with family. A slice of Streuselkuchen or Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte was savored once a week, not demanded daily. Walking through daily life. In 1970, West Germany had approximately 14 million passenger cars for a population of 60 million. Roughly 27% of households owned an automobile, leaving the majority dependent on their feet, bicycles, or public transport. This would change dramatically over the decade, with car ownership reaching 55% by 1973. But the infrastructure and habits of a walking society remained intact. German cities were built around pedestrian needs. Children walked to school in groups. Housewives walked to the baker, the butcher, the greengrocer, carrying increasingly heavy bags between shops. The local Marktplatz required navigating on foot, browsing stalls, carrying purchases home. Public transport meant walking to the Bushaltestelle, or Bahnhof, transferring between lines, walking from the final stop to your destination. These accumulated kilometers burned calories without anyone thinking about exercise. Cooking from scratch. Convenience foods existed in the 1970s Germany, but they occupied a marginal place in most households. Frozen fish sticks and canned soups were occasional shortcuts, not daily staples. The Hausfrau cooked from raw ingredients because that was both economically sensible and culturally expected. Cooking skills passed through generations like family heirlooms. Girls learned in mandatory Hauswirtschaft classes at school. They watched their mothers prepare Sauerbraten, Rouladen, and Eintopf from memory. Making a meal meant peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, monitoring simmering pots for an hour or more. This labor-intensive process naturally limited portion sizes. Preparing more food simply meant more work. Recipes from German cookbooks of the era specified serving quantities that would seem modest today. A single chicken was expected to feed a family across 2 meals, roasted one evening, then transformed into soup or fricassee the next. Stretching ingredients reflected both thrift and cultural attitudes about excess. Sugar as a precious commodity. Sugar had been rationed during the war and remained relatively expensive in the 1970s. Housewives used it sparingly, reserving sweetness for special occasions. Baking a cake for Sunday coffee meant measuring sugar carefully from the weekly supply. Sweets were treats distributed to children on Saturdays, a considered selection from the local Süßwarengeschäft, not a constant presence. Soft drinks were novelties. Children drank water, milk, or diluted Apfelsaft. Cola was reserved for birthday parties and special celebrations. The concept of consuming hundreds of liquid calories daily simply didn't exist in most German homes. Coffee and tea were taken without sugar by many adults, a preference formed during years when sweetness couldn't be guaranteed. Food manufacturers hadn't yet mastered the art of engineering irresistible combinations of sugar, salt, and fat. Breakfast cereals were simple: Haferflocken, cornflakes, or muesli without chocolate coatings. Yogurt was plain and tangy, requiring a spoonful of homemade jam for sweetness. Industrial labor and physical work. The Wirtschaftswunder, Germany's post-war economic miracle, was built on manufacturing: coal mining in the Ruhr, steel production, automobile assembly at Volkswagen in Wolfsburg, chemical plants at BASF. These industries employed millions in jobs that demanded physical exertion for 8 or more hours daily. Even office work involved more movement. Without email, documents were carried between departments. Filing cabinets required standing and bending. Typewriters demanded physical engagement. The coffee machine was down the hall, not at arm's reach. Elevators existed but weren't always used. Household chores meant genuine physical labor. Washing machines were basic, requiring manual loading and unloading. Vacuum cleaners were heavy contraptions, cleaning windows, scrubbing floors, hanging laundry on outdoor lines. Maintaining a home required sustained effort. This work fell predominantly to women, whose bodies remained active throughout the day. Portions and expectations. Restaurant plates in 1970s. Germany would appear undersized to modern diners. Standard dinner plates measured perhaps 23 centimeters across, not the 30-centimeter platters common today. Meat appeared as part of the meal, accompanied by generous vegetables and potatoes, not as a massive centerpiece. Home cooking followed similar proportions. Recipe books specified servings that contemporary cooks might consider starters. The concept of American-style supersizing hadn't crossed the Atlantic. Taking seconds happened, but casually grazing through multiple portions wasn't normalized behavior. Restaurant culture reinforced these expectations. A proper meal had structure. Portions satisfied without creating discomfort. The goal was contentment, not the challenge of finishing an overwhelming quantity. Structured eating, limited snacking. The idea of constant eating throughout the day was virtually unknown in the 1970s Germany. You ate Frühstück, Mittagessen, perhaps a small Vesper or afternoon snack, and Abendbrot. Between-meal eating provoked comments about spoiling one's appetite. Kitchen cupboards didn't overflow with chips, crackers, and packaged snacks. A child might receive pocket money measured in Pfennige, limiting trips to the kiosk. A careful selection of sweets from glass jars was weighed, placed in a paper bag, and expected to last several days. Workplaces lacked vending machines on every floor. Office workers took defined breaks for coffee pause, perhaps with a single biscuit. Eating at one's desk was unusual and somewhat frowned upon. Shops closed at 6 in the evening, cutting off impulse purchases. On Sundays, everything was shuttered. The 24-hour availability of food that modern Germans take for granted simply didn't exist. Food without engineering. Ultra-processed foods barely existed in their modern form during the 1970s. What processing did occur remained visible and comprehensible. Flour came from wheat, butter from cream, cheese from milk. Ingredient lists on packaging contained recognizable items. Bread came from the local bakery, baked fresh that morning with flour, water, yeast, and salt. The industrialized, preservative-laden loaves, designed for week-long shelf life, hadn't yet replaced proper German bread. Meat was identifiable as having come from an animal. Fish meant whole fish or clear fillets, not breaded mystery products. Food scientists hadn't yet perfected combinations engineered to override natural satiety signals. Products weren't designed for what the industry would later call cravability. Meals had natural stopping points because the food itself didn't trigger compulsive overconsumption. Social attitudes and weight. Weight gain attracted frank comment in ways that would seem inappropriate today. Doctors spoke bluntly about excess weight. Family members felt free to observe that someone had zugenommen. This wasn't particularly kind, but it created social pressure toward maintaining weight within certain ranges. Fashion reinforced these expectations. Clothing came in limited size ranges. If you gained weight, finding clothes that fit became genuinely difficult rather than simply requiring a different section of the store. This practical constraint provided immediate feedback for weight changes. Television featured almost exclusively slim presenters and actors. While harmful in many ways, this uniformity created clear expectations about normal body sizes that the later body positivity movement would challenge. Economic realities. Food represented a substantial portion of household budgets in the 1970s Germany, perhaps 25 to 30% compared to around 15% today. Families couldn't afford waste or excess. You purchased what you needed, planned meals carefully, and consumed everything bought. Throwing away food meant literally discarding money. Eating out was genuinely expensive relative to wages. A restaurant meal might cost what someone earned in half a day's work. Fast food chains were only beginning to appear. The economics pushed families toward home cooking and sensible portions because alternatives were simply unaffordable. The 1973 oil crisis delivered an economic shock that ended 3 decades of uninterrupted growth. Unemployment climbed from 1.25% to nearly 5% within 2 years. Those who remember genuine scarcity responded to renewed uncertainty with conservative consumption patterns. Understanding the transformation. The relative slimness of 1970s. Germans wasn't about superior willpower or moral virtue. It reflected a completely different food environment and way of living. Walking as the default transportation, cooking from scratch, limited processed foods, smaller portions, minimal snacking, and physical labor all combined to create calorie balance without conscious effort. Economic constraints, social expectations, and memories of genuine hunger reinforced these patterns. The obesity rates that have since climbed in Germany don't represent personal failure. They demonstrate how dramatically food systems, built environments, and daily routines have transformed in just 50 years. Today, compared to reference values from the 1970s, 1 in 5 German school children and 1 in 3 adolescents is overweight. Obesity prevalence among German adults has doubled since the late 1980s. These statistics tell the story of a society that has fundamentally changed how it eats, moves, and lives. The modern challenge isn't recreating the 1970s. It's understanding what has changed and why, so that healthier choices become easier within contemporary life.